What the place you go to find peace was hiding something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be discovered, but is now beginning to wake up? For decades, the stories have been whispered among rangers, buried in incomplete case files, and dismissed as altitude sickness or campfire tales. But I know they're real. I've seen the evidence that defies every scientific principle I was trained to trust. I've felt the vibrations through bedrock that carry intelligence in their frequency, and I've looked into the eyes of beings who claim to be older than human memory. This isn't just another wilderness mystery. This is a countdown, a biological, geological, and potentially cosmic countdown happening right now beneath one of America's most visited wilderness areas. And by the time you finish this account, you'll understand why the normal world you return to might be the thinnest of veils, stretched taut over something waiting, something hungry, and my name is Elias Vance. And for 8 years, I wore the green and gray of the U.S. Forest Service in a district centered around a massive volcanic peak in the Cascade Range. I'll keep the specific mountain unnamed, not for secrecy's sake, but for your skepticism. Names trigger recognition, and recognition triggers preconceived notions of New Age spirituality or predictable conspiracy. This story is neither. It is, to the best of my ability, a clinical report of events that began in the autumn of 1994 and concluded with a decision that haunts my waking hours. I arrived in '92 with a degree in ecology and a pragmatic view of wilderness management. The job was equal parts public educator, first responder, and custodian. We managed permits, extracted injured hikers, maintained trails, and yes, occasionally had to gently dissuade individuals from attempting to meditate inside active bear dens or summit during electrical storms. The mountain, like many of its stature, attracted a spectrum of visitors. The majority were wonderful, families, serious climbers, bird watchers. A persistent minority, however, were the seekers. These were individuals drawn by the mountain's reputation in underground texts and whispered lore as a beacon, a portal, or the dwelling place of the Lemurians, a mythical race from the lost continent of Mu said to live in hidden crystal cities within the earth. Initially, I treated these interactions with professional detachment. I'd nod, provide a standard safety briefing, and note their intended route. My personal skepticism was a wall I considered unbreachable. That wall developed its first crack not from a strange story, but from a pattern in the data. Every ranger station keeps a ledger of incidents, injuries, missing persons, search and rescues, and unusual reports. Over my first 2 years, I noticed, almost subconsciously, a subtle clustering. Every 14 to 18 months, there would be a small spike in what were logged as UA7 reports, unusual acoustic phenomena. These reports were vague, often filed by exhausted hikers or overwrought individuals. Strange noises, eerie singing, metal groaning from the ground. They were routinely closed with notations like probable geological settling, wind through specific lava tube configurations, or high-altitude auditory hallucination. The pattern wasn't in the reports themselves, but in what followed. In 3 consecutive cycles, a UA7 cluster was followed, within 10 to 14 days, by a missing person case. Not a typical hiker lost on a trail case, but the baffling kind. An experienced outdoors person, often hiking solo, would vanish from a well-defined route. Minimal signs of distress, no weather events to explain it. And in each case, the search would yield one peculiar, inconsistent detail. A campsite in perfect order, but the camera left behind. A single boot placed neatly on a trail marker. A notebook open to a page filled not with writing, but with intricate, spiraling geometric shapes. I mentioned this pattern once to my direct supervisor, a man with 30 years of service. He chewed his pipe stem and looked out the window at the looming peak. "The mountain keeps its own ledger, Vance," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Our job is to manage the people on its skin, not to speculate about its bones. File the reports, run the searches, and let the old stories stay stories. It was the closest I ever got to an acknowledgement that the pattern was real. The catalyst arrived on a crisp September morning. My partner, Anya Sharma, was a 15-year veteran, a geologist by training and the most rationally grounded person I knew. She didn't startle at bears or panic during storm rescues when she walked into the station that day. However, the color had drained from her face. She didn't speak. She simply placed a field recorder on the desk between us and pressed play. The first few seconds were the hiss of dead air. Then it came, a deep, resonant, harmonic tone. It wasn't a single note, but a chord composed of frequencies that seemed to slide against each other. Beneath the primary tone was a rhythmic, pulsing subharmonic, like the world's slowest, deepest heartbeat. The recording lasted for 47 seconds before cutting back to static. I recorded that at 3:17 a.m., Anya said, her voice tight, from my back porch. Her house was 5 miles from the nearest trailhead, nestled in a quiet valley. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew it matched the descriptions from the UA-7 files. Seismic activity was nil last night. No flights. No industry. I've played it for 2 geologists from the university. They have no classification for it. One said it sounds manufactured, but not by any machinery he knows. Later that afternoon, the calls started coming in, not from seekers, but from a respected climbing guide, a retired meteorologist camping with his grandchildren, and a team of biology researchers. All reported hearing the same harmonic hum between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. Their locations formed a rough circle with a 3-mile radius on the mountain's southeastern slope. The source, if it was a single source, had to be powerful, and it had to be deep. We organized a routine patrol for that sector. Anya and I took it. The hike was quiet, the forest holding its breath. We took readings. Standard EMF, which flickered oddly. Ground temperature, which showed inexplicable warm patches in shaded granite. And we left a new digital recorder program to activate on sound. As we turned to leave a secluded granite basin, a movement caught my eye. High on a cliff band, a figure in a bright yellow jacket was moving laterally across a near-vertical face. No rope, no apparent gear. The movement was all wrong. Smooth where it should be labored, direct where the rock offered no path. I raised my binoculars. The figure was not climbing. It was walking, as if on an invisible ledge. Then, in the space between one blink and the next, it was gone. Not a fall, a deletion. Anya saw it too. We scrambled for an hour to reach the base of that cliff. We found nothing. No scuff marks, no drop gear. Just the same faint scent of ozone and wet stone, and a patch of rock so warm it steamed slightly in the cool afternoon air. That night, the hum returned. This time, the digital recorder we left captured it perfectly. But when we played it back, the file was corrupt, not silent, filled with chaotic, screaming digital noise that made the speakers distort. The only thing that remained clear was a final second, a human voice whispering a single word that sounded like aperture. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of fruitless protocol. We filed a report on the figure in yellow, a report that felt absurd even as we typed it. Possible visual phenomenon, likely trick of light and altitude. No missing persons reports matched the description. It was a bureaucratic fiction, a paper shield against the unclassifiable. The warm patch of rock, however, was a tangible anomaly. We returned the following day with proper equipment. A thermal camera, a ground-penetrating radar unit on loan from the geology department, and a sense of grim determination. The thermal imaging confirmed it. A perfect vertical rectangle. approximately 7 feet by 3, on the cliff face radiated heat at a consistent 12 degrees Fahrenheit above the surrounding granite. It wasn't a surface effect. The GPR told a more confusing story. The signal penetrated about 15 feet before hitting what appeared to be a void, a cavity. But the return signal was chaotic, scattering as if the interior walls were perfectly, impossibly reflective. More unsettling was the reading directly in front of the warm rectangle. For a depth of about 3 feet, the radar showed nothing. Not rock, not air. An absence, as if the machine was looking into a perfect vacuum shaped like a door. Anya ran a hand over the warm stone. This isn't geothermal. The gradient is all wrong. It's localized, like a panel with its own internal heat source. She took a rock hammer and tapped gently. The sound was dead, a soft thud instead of the sharp clink of granite. I placed my palm flat against it. The warmth was even, pulsating almost imperceptibly in time with my own heartbeat. And then, for a fraction of a second, the solidity beneath my hand seemed to yield. Not give way, but become insubstantial, like pressing against thick, warm fog. I snatched my hand back. Anya had seen my jerk. What? Did you feel that? Feel what? I couldn't articulate it. It was a sensation not of touch, but permission briefly granted, then revoked. We took samples. The hammer and chisel skittered off the warm zone, as if it were hardened steel, leaving not a scratch. We sampled the cold rock beside it. That night, the hum returned. This time, we were ready. We had 3 recorders running on different systems, digital, analog tape, and a device that translated audio vibrations into light patterns. At 3:18 a.m., the harmonic cord vibrated through the cabin. The digital recorder produced the same corrupted scream. The analog tape captured it, but when played back, the harmonic tones were there, buried under a wash of white noise, so intense it masked them. The optical device, however, worked. Projected on the wall was a complex, shifting mandala of light. The patterns were not random. They pulsed and folded in sequences that felt mathematical, intentional. Anya filmed the projection with a high-speed camera. Slowed down, the truth was undeniable. The light patterns were a language, a flowing, non-repetitive script of geometries that evolved with each harmonic shift. We were not hearing a geological sound. We were hearing a broadcast. This realization shattered our remaining professional detachment. We were forest rangers, not xenolinguists. We needed context, history. The mountain's modern myths were useless. Channeled texts about Lemurians spoke of love and light, not of haunting harmonic broadcasts from warm doors and cliffs. We needed older stories. I reached out to a cultural liaison for the regional tribal nations. It was a delicate process, requiring respect and patience. After days exchanged messages, I was granted a phone call with an elder, a man I refer to as Mr. K. He spoke slowly, carefully. "You are asking about the songs from the stone," he said, not as a question. "Yes, sir. And about warm places on the rock that shouldn't be warm." There was a long silence. "Those are not places," he finally said. "They are seals. My grandfather's grandfather called them the binding stones. The stories say that when the world was young, a sickness fell from the sky. Not a sickness of body, but a place. It wanted to make the world into a quiet, empty picture. It had no form of its own, so it would borrow yours, then discard it. How was it stopped? I asked, my notes forgotten. It was not stopped. It was contained. The first people made a bargain with the Guardians, beings who were here before the rocks cooled. The Guardians had the strength to weave a cage of song, a net made of specific sounds that the sickness could not digest. But the song needed singers. The Guardians became the singers. They wove themselves into the song, into the mountain itself, to hold the cage shut. Their bodies became the prison walls. Their voices became the bars. My blood ran cold. The hum, the harmonic sound. Is that the song? It is the sound of the cage straining, Mr. K said, his voice heavy. The singers grow tired. Their number fewer. The song weakens. When you hear it, it is a warning. The seals, the warm stones, they are locks. And a weak lock can be opened from the outside or from the inside. What happens if the song stops? Another silence, even longer. Then the sickness finishes its meal. It would not be a war. It would be an erasure, a silence so deep, not even memory would remain. He would speak no more on it. The conversation was over, but he had given us a framework. We weren't dealing with aliens or ancient civilizations in the pop culture sense. We were dealing with a biocosmic containment system, millennia old, now failing. The hum was a distress signal and a structural component. The warm rocks were access points, weakening. The people who vanished, were they taken by the sickness, probing through the cracks? Or were they lured by the song itself? Their consciousness somehow resonated with the failing lock? Everything. The UA, 7 reports, the missing persons clusters, even old survey maps. She found a chilling correlation. Every major disappearance, going back 50 years in the records, occurred within a 1-mile radius of one of 3 specific geologic features. Features that match the description of binding stones in vague pioneer diaries. One was our warm cliff. The other 2 were deep in restricted wilderness. We had a map. We had a hypothesis. A failing, ancient prison. We had a timeline. The hum was active, meaning the system was critically stressed. And we had a responsibility. We couldn't call the FBI or the military. What would we say? We needed to understand the mechanism. We needed to see if the seal could be reinforced. Anya proposed a terrifyingly simple plan. The next time a hum activates, we need to be at the stone, not with recorders, with a resonator. If it's a sonic lock, maybe we can introduce a stabilizing frequency, a keystone tone to shore up the chord. It was a guess, a wild, potentially catastrophic guess. We were mechanics contemplating repair of a reactor we didn't understand. But the alternative was to file more reports and wait for the next person to vanish. And the next, until one day the silence Mr. K described became total. We spent the next 4 days in a state of nervous preparation, assembling sound equipment, studying the optical patterns from a hum for clues to its fundamental frequency. The mountain was quiet. No hums. No calls. It was the calm before the storm. We were waiting for the lock to twitch again so we could try to pick it, unaware that some locks are designed to snap shut on curious fingers. The silence stretched for 6 nights. Each evening, Anya and I would check the equipment, review the harmonic patterns we captured, and wait. The tension was a physical presence in the ranger station. Normal duties felt surreal. Issuing a fire would permit, while mentally calculating sonic frequencies, felt like living in 2 parallel, irreconcilable worlds. The mountain itself seemed to be holding its breath, a massive, watchful presence. On the 7th night, the barometric pressure dropped suddenly, though the sky remained clear. A strange, metallic taste hung in the air. We knew. We loaded the truck in silence. Our gear was a bizarre amalgam. Climbing harnesses, emergency medical kits, a high-wattage portable generator, and a custom speaker array connected to a frequency generator Anya had programmed. The plan was to arrive at the warm cliff an hour before predicted 3:17 a.m. activation. Set up, at the moment the natural hum began, introduce our reinforcing tone, a calculated inversion of what we perceived as the most unstable harmonic in the sequence. The height was a nightmare of amplified sounds. Every rustle, every scuff of boot on stone was deafening. The forest was a black wall around our bobbing pools of headlamp light. We reached the clearing before the cliff at 2:45 a.m. The warm rectangle was faintly visible on the thermal camera, a ghostly outline of heat in the cool rock. We worked quickly, setting up the speaker tripod 20 feet from the cliff face, running cables back to the generator and frequency console 50 yards away. We wore noise-canceling headphones with a bypass line, so we could hear the environment. At 3:16 a.m., the world changed. It didn't begin with a sound. It began with a pressure. The air thickened, becoming heavy and dense, pressing against our eardrums. The headlamps flickered. Then the hum erupted, but it was wrong. It wasn't the deep, harmonic chord from the recordings. This was a screech, a dissonant, grinding wail that felt like ice picks driven into our temples, even through the headphones. The warm rectangle on the cliff didn't just glow. It ignited. Lines of fierce blue-white light erupted from its edges, carving the perfect door shape into the rock. The light wasn't reflected. It was emitted, burning with the cold intensity of an arc welder. The patterns corrupted. Anya yelled, her voice tinny over the headphone line. She was frantically adjusting the frequency generator. It's not the stabilizing sequence. It's the opposite. It's a cascade failure. Before I could respond, our equipment went berserk. The speaker array let out a piercing feedback squeal and then exploded in a shower of sparks. The generator coughed and died. Every battery-powered device on our persons, headlamps, radios, cameras, simultaneously went dark. We were plunged into utter blackness, save for the terrifying, silent blue rectangle burning in the cliff face. The dissonant screech had stopped with equipment failure, leaving a vacuum of sound so complete it was nauseating. Then the door opened. IT didn't swing, slide, or crumble. The rectangle of solid rock, defined by the blue light, simply ceased to be. One moment, it was a burning outline on a cliff. The next, it was a doorway into absolute blackness. Not the black of a shadow, but the black of a void, a depth that swallowed the fierce blue light from its own frame. A wave of air rushed out, carrying that now familiar scent of ozone and wet stone, but underpinned by something new, something organic and deeply stale, like the air from a sealed tomb opened after millennia. And a figure stepped out. It was not the graceful, luminous being of myth. It was humanoid, tall and painfully thin, clad in what looked like tattered, petrified leather or bark. Its skin, where visible, was the color and texture of dried clay. It did not walk. It stumbled, as if its limbs were unfamiliar or atrophied. It collapsed onto the gravel just outside the doorway, lying still for a moment. Then it slowly, painfully, pushed itself up onto its hands and knees and turned its head toward us. Its face was a horror of exhaustion. Deep, sunken sockets held eyes that were milky and blind-looking, yet they seemed to fix on our location with unnerving precision. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. It raised a claw-like hand, not in threat, but in a gesture that could have been supplication or warning. Anya was already moving, her medical training overriding her terror. She grabbed a chemical light stick from her dead pack, cracked it, and approached cautiously, the green glow painting the scene in ghastly shades. "Don't," I hissed, but she was already kneeling a few feet from the being. "It's hurt," she said, her voice trembling but clinical. Or starved. The being's mouth worked again. This time, a sound emerged, a dry, rustling whisper that seemed to form directly in my mind rather than in my ears. "Breach." My watches ended. Its head swiveled toward the open doorway behind it. The song broke. "The way is open. It tastes the air." "What are you?" I asked, my own voice a dry croak. "Last of the wardens. The bind ones. The singers." The word singers was filled with infinite sorrow. We grew weak. The chord missing notes. Your sound. It looked toward our shattered speaker array. Was the wrong note, the final strain. It was trying to tell us that our attempt to help had been the catalyst for the failure. Our ignorance had snapped a fraying thread. A new sound began to emanate from the open doorway. Not a hum, a slithering, scraping sound, vast and slow, like a continent-sized body dragging itself over stone. A smell wafted out, extinguishing the ozone, a smell of dust, of vacuum, of the utter absence of life. The warden's head jerked toward the sound. A jolt of pure panic seemed to animate its wasted frame. With surprising strength, it lunged forward and grabbed Anya's wrist. Its touch was cold and hard as stone. The seal is broken here, but the cage still holds elsewhere. It can only send to tendril. A feeler. You must close this door. How? I demanded, stepping forward. A warden must be in the lock. The song must be sung from within the threshold to reweave the pattern. It looked from Anya to me, its milky eyes holding a terrible, knowing light. One must take the place. One must become part of the song. Now, before it focuses and finds the breach permanent. It was offering a choice, a sacrifice, to step into that black doorway, to stand in the lock, and presumably to die there, becoming a living part of whatever sonic barrier still existed deeper within. The scraping, slithering sound from the darkness was growing louder, more deliberate. The air flowing from the door grew colder. Anya looked at me, her face pale in the green chemical light. Her eyes held no hesitation, only a devastating calculation. She was about to speak, to volunteer. I saw it. In that moment, the weight of my own inaction, the reports I'd filed away, the patterns I'd ignored, the arrogant attempt to fix what I didn't understand, crashed down on me. This was my fault, my responsibility. No, I said, the word leaving my lips before thought. I looked at the wasted warden. Tell me what to do. The warden's grip on Anya's wrist tightened, then released. It turned its awful, knowing gaze to me. Step into the lock. Stand at the center of the threshold. Do not enter the deep. Face the world you know. And sing. Sing what? My voice was barely a whisper. I was not a singer. The silence in your mind. The shape of your fear. The memory of wind. It will be translated. The lock reads intention, not tone. It gestured weakly toward the yawning black doorway. But you must stand within the frame. Your presence will be the catalyst. Your life, the energy. The scraping from the depths was rhythmic now. A deliberate, probing drag. A sense of focus coalesced in the air. A predatory attention turning toward the breach. We were out of time. Anya grabbed my arm. Elias, you can't. I have to. The words held a certainty I didn't feel. It was my plan. My mistake. I pried her hand off. Get back. Get the emergency beacon from the truck. Hike until it gets a signal and call in everything. A landslide. A gas vent. Anything. Just get this area sealed off. I didn't wait for her reply. I turned and walked toward the doorway. The blue light framing it cast no illumination inward. The blackness was absolute, a wall of nothing. The air grew colder with each step. The smell of ancient dust and void stronger. At the threshold, I paused. The line between the gravel of the clearing and the absolute blackness was razor sharp. I took a final breath of pine-scented air and stepped across. The change was instantaneous and total. Sound vanished. The distant rush of wind, Anya's choked cry, the scraping from below, all were erased. I stood in perfect, pressurized silence. I could see the outside world, Anya, the cliff, the forest, but it was like looking through a thick, dark lens. The colors were bleached, the edges blurred. I turned slowly. Behind me was not the mountain's interior, but more the same profound blackness, though in its depths I could now perceive the faintest geometric traceries of light, like a colossal, dormant circuit board stretching into infinity. I was in the lock, the interface. A pressure began to build, not in the air, but inside my skull. It was a demand. The lock was waiting for the key. My consciousness offered up, "Sing." The warden's instruction echoed. I closed my eyes against the disorienting view. What was the silence in my mind? It was a hum, but corrupted. The fear? It was the image of that vast, slithering thing finding its way out. The memory of wind? It was a feeling of standing on a high ridge, the world spread below, full of life. I opened my mouth. No sound came out. I couldn't force it. The pressure increased, becoming painful. I wasn't doing it right. Panic flickered. I was failing. The scraping sound began to bleed through the silence, louder, closer. Focus. I thought of the pattern of light Anya had captured, the mandala. I tried to hold its shape in my mind. I thought of the specific, crumbling harmonic from our readings. I imagined it whole. I imagined it strong. I poured every ounce of will into that mental image, into the feeling of stability, of a chord perfectly resolving. I didn't sing with my voice. I sang with my intent, and the lock responded that a vibration started in the soles of my boots, a deep, fundamental resonance that traveled up my bones. A light, not blue but a soft, gold-white, began to emanate from my own body. I could see the veins in my closed eyelids glowing. The geometric tracers in the deep black behind me flared to life, nodes of light connecting in a rapid, cascading sequence toward the doorway where I stood. I was the conduit. My life energy, my mental focus, was being woven into the pattern. The scraping sound from the deeps changed to a hiss of frustration, then a shriek of pure, silent rage that vibrated in my teeth. I felt a wave of cold unlike anything physical, a cold that was the absence of energy, of existence, washed toward the doorway from inside. It was a tendril, the feeler of the thing in the cage, rushing to exploit the open door before it shut. The golden light from my body and the reactivated circuits met at the threshold. The blue, burning outline of the doorway flickered, then began to change, shifting through the spectrum toward a stable, calm white. The blackness within the frame began to solidify, turning opaque, then translucent, then taking on a rough, granular texture of granite. I could feel the world outside becoming clearer, louder. Anya's face, etched with terror and awe, came into sharp focus. But the cost was immediate and brutal. It felt like a vacuum was attached to my soul, a draining not of blood, but of essence. My memories flickered. The face of my first-grade teacher, the smell of my childhood home, the feel of a first kiss, each one dimming, not forgotten, but becoming distant, like stories told about someone else. My emotions flattened. The panic, the fear, the love for the world outside, all were being siphoned, converted into sonic mortar for crumbling wall. I was becoming a component, a living battery in the binding stone. Just as a view of the outside world stabilized completely and the last vestige of blackness was replaced by the seeming of solid rock, a final, wrenching pull came from the mechanism. It demanded a foundational memory, a cornerstone of self to anchor the repair. Without volition, my mind offered one up, the feeling of unconditional safety in my mother's arms, aged for during a thunderstorm. The memory lit up in my mind's eye, vivid and warm, and then was extinguished, taken, sealed into the stone. I still knew the facts of it, but the emotional truth, the visceral feeling of that safety was gone, erased from my internal experience forever. The light died. The vibrations ceased. I stood facing the cliff wall. It was just rock again, cool to the touch, the faint morning light revealing its ordinary lichen-stained surface. No warmth, No blue fire. The doorway was gone, resealed. I took a shuddering step backward, out of the lock space that was no longer there, and collapsed to my knees. I was empty, hollowed out. I was still me, but a version stripped of vital emotional pigments, a sketch where a painting had been. Anya rushed to me. Elias, God, you're ice cold. Her touch felt distant, muted. It's closed, I rasped. My own voice sounded foreign. The warden had collapsed just before the door sealed. It turned to dust and stone flakes. I nodded slowly. Its watch had ended. Mine, in some terrible, diminished way, had perhaps just begun. We had stopped a breach, but we had not fixed the cage. We had patched one lock by sacrificing a piece of a human soul to its mechanism. The mountain contained a dozen such locks, and the great, slithering hunger at the center now knew, with the clarity of a predator that has tasted blood through a fence, that the fence was weak, and that beings on the other side were fragile, full of the energy it craved. The dawn that broke over the mountain was the most indifferent I have ever witnessed. The world had not ended, yet something in it had fundamentally changed. Anya half carried, half dragged me back to the truck. I moved like a marionette with cut strings. The physical exhaustion was profound, but it was nothing compared to the internal void. The world was muted, seen through a pane of frosted glass. The green of the trees was a fact, not a beauty. The concern on Anya's face was a data point, not a comfort. At the station, we filed a bare-bones report, responded to possible geological event, minor equipment loss, no injuries requiring off-site medical. It was a masterpiece of omission. I took a week of personal leave. I sat in my cabin, trying to feel. I would look at a photograph of my family and understand I loved them, but the warm, swelling sensation that should accompany the thought was absent, a flat line on an emotional EKG. The stolen memory was a cornerstone. Without it, the entire structure of my felt experience was compromised. Anya visited daily. She didn't try to cheer me up. She brought research. With the door sealed, the external phenomena had ceased. No hums, no warm rocks. But her focus had turned inward, to the historical record and to me. It wasn't random, Elias, she said one evening, spreading photocopied pages of pioneer journals and declassified Forestry Service logs on my table. The disappearances. They follow a pattern of psychological profile, not just location. She had cross-rendered the scant biographical data on the missing. A significant number were individuals described in ranger contact notes as loners, burdened, or seeking a fresh start. Others were deeply empathetic, caregivers, social workers, artists. It's not taking people at random, she concluded, her voice grim. It's selecting for specific cognitive or emotional signatures, high emotional capacity, or profound emotional fatigue. Maybe those are more resonant, easier to integrate into the lock's mechanism, or more nourishing to what's in cage. I was living proof. The lock had taken the part of me most capable of deep emotional connection. It had consumed my cornerstone of. And the warden said, a warden must be in the lock. Anya continued, pacing. But what is a warden? We assumed they were a different species, ancient beings. But what if a warden is just a consciousness that is bonded with the lock? What if the original builders are gone, and what we've been calling wardens for millennia are just previous volunteers, humans or others, who stepped in to patch a breach? The implication was horrifying. The fading singers weren't dying of old age. They were the accumulated volunteer patches over centuries. Their individual selves slowly eroded, becoming nothing more than mindless, sustaining tones in the grand song. The prison wasn't just failing. It was being passively maintained by a slow, sacrificial drip of souls. We patched one lock, I said, my voice monotone. There are 2 other major sites on your map. Probably more we don't know about. The pressure from the center, it's constant. It will find the next weakest point. Anya stopped pacing and looked at me. I know. And when it does, we'll hear the hum again. And someone else will vanish. Maybe a hiker. Maybe a kid on a camping trip. Their essence consumed, not to power the cage, but to be consumed by what's inside it. The prisoner got a taste. It knows we're here. The next breach will be more aggressive. We had arrived at the terrible, logical end of our journey. We weren't detectives who had solved a mystery. We were engineers who had discovered a critically failing piece of planetary infrastructure. An infrastructure that required sentient fuel. So the choice is this. I summarized, the hollow feeling inside me making the words weightless, yet inescapable. We do nothing. The locks fail one by one. The tendrils get stronger, taking more people, erasing them completely from reality, until a major seal blows and the central cage is compromised. Global erasure. Or, Anya said softly, we find a way to proactively reinforce the system. But the only reinforcement mechanism we know of is voluntary integration, a human consciousness bonding with a lock. We can't ask people to do that, I said. Can we afford not to? She replied. This isn't about spirituality or curiosity anymore. This is a quarantine. And the quarantine walls are dissolving. Do we wait for a catastrophic breach? Or do we establish a volunteer corps? People who understand the threat, who are willing to give up the depth of their emotional life, pieces of their very identity, to act as living rivets in a dam holding back an ocean of nothing. The ethical abyss before us was bottomless. It was utilitarianism of the most grotesque kind. Sacrifice the few, their inner lives, their souls, to save the physical existence of the many. And who would choose such a thing? The burdened? The empathetic? The very profiles it preyed upon? I looked at my hands. They were just hands. I knew I should feel horror, despair, noble determination. I felt only a cold, clear recognition of the equation. I was already a partial warden, a used component. I had less to lose than a whole person. We start with the other two sites. I heard myself say, we monitor them. We develop better diagnostics. Not to try a sonic fix. That's what caused the breach. We learn to measure the strain on the lock itself. And when the next one is near failure, you can't mean to do it again. Anya breathed. I'm already damaged. I said, the truth of it is clinical as the rest. The mechanism has a template for me now. It might be more efficient. It might take less. And I know the cost. I met her eyes, trying to convey something I could no longer feel. It has to be me. You're the researcher. You're the one who has to understand the bigger picture, find another way, or manage the volunteers. If it comes to that, we sat in silence as the finality of it settled. There would be no government task force, no triumphant solution. There would only be a silent, desperate, and utterly secret stewardship, conducted in the shadows of the wilderness, paid for in fragments of the human spirit. The mountain silence was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet of a holding cell, and we had just appointed ourselves as reluctant, damned guards. If this account has held your attention through to this bleak conclusion, then you understand this isn't entertainment. This is a transmission. A signal passed from the shadows of a failing world into the light of your attention. I am recording this because Anya and I cannot be the only ones who know. The weight is too great. The pattern is too big. The mountain in my story is not the only one. The legends of hollow mountains, of singing peaks, of doors in the wilderness that open for the lost, they are global. They are the human subconscious scratching at a truth it cannot fully comprehend. The mechanisms may differ, sonic, geomagnetic, psychological, but the underlying imperative is the same. Containment. I am sharing this for two reasons. First, as a warning. If you are in the wilderness and you hear a sound that doesn't belong, a hum that resonates in your bones rather than your ears, if you find a place that feels thin, leave. Do not investigate. Do not try to record it. Your curiosity could be the vibration that snaps the thread. Second, and more importantly, I am sharing this to find the others. There must be others like Anya and me. Rangers, researchers, tribal historians, wanderers who have seen the edges of this truth and carry a piece of the knowledge. We are fragmented, isolated, doubting our own sanity. We need to connect, to compare notes, to build a real understanding that isn't based on desperate, sacrificial patch jobs. This is where you come in. This channel, Winds of Thought, is more than a storytelling hub. It is intended to be a clearinghouse for the specific kind of signal, a place where patterns can be compared without ridicule, where a strange experience in the Scottish Highlands can be viewed alongside a similar one in the Andes. Your engagement is the catalyst. By liking this video, you tell the algorithm that this content matters, that it should be pushed beyond the echo chamber of the already convinced to the edges where the skeptical but observant might see it. By subscribing, you become part of a growing watchtower. You help create a network of attention pointed at the fragile places in our world. Most crucially, I need you to share this. Not for views, for reach. Share with that friend who told you a weird story about a camping trip once. Share it with that geology professor, that folklorist, that retired pilot. Put in front of eyes that might recognize a fragment of the pattern. And in the comments, I'm asking you directly, what is the strangest, most inexplicable natural phenomenon you have personally witnessed? Not something you read about, something you saw, heard, or felt that has never fit into the world as you were told it works. Give the location, the date if you remember, the sensation. Do not worry about sounding credible. We are past that. We are collecting data points on a map of reality that has missing sections. The next breach is coming. The question is whether we will face it as scattered, ignorant individuals or as the beginnings of a conscious, prepared watch. The choice now is also yours.